Well, it's official. The worst case scenario has happened for the United States and the US military in the country of Niger. Niger has a new leader. But that's not the problem. The problem is this guy right here is the general of the Niger army, and his name is General Tayani, and he is now in charge of Niger. I'm not going to call him the president. I'm just going to call him the leader. Now, please stick with me in this video because Russia is already eyeing down Niger, and the United States is sort of stuck in a weird situation where they don't necessarily know what's going on. They don't know how long this new guy is going to be the leader, and we don't even know what's going on to the not current president of Niger. Now, first things first, everything is lining up perfectly for Russia. Russia is boasting the highest grain yields they've ever had in the history of Russian agricultural history. I mean, they're about to be giving free grain to African countries. Check this out.
Where Putin has now promised free grain supplies to 6 African nations, showing signs that Moscow is seeking to capitalize on the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. Speaking on the first day of Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, the Russian president claimed Moscow will be able to replace Ukrainian grain exports that have been blocked since Russia decided to abandon the brokered arrangement. The 2-day summit is
Now, the reason why this is all relevant is because Russia is playing into the hands of these destabilized countries and nations within Africa. Russia could care less about how these countries are doing. However, they're willing to give them free food and to boast, oh my gosh, look how much grain and wheat and look how great our agricultural production is doing in Russia. It's doing so well. We're going to help out all of these African nations and give you guys all some free food. Now, the thing is this, Niger is currently destabilized, and this is the perfect opportunity for Russia to try and capitalize and maybe give them some free food and, you know, maybe start to help them out with some security. We'll get into all of that, and then we'll also get into how this is not good for the United States, and they're going to have to try and figure it out.
backing in Africa, where he retains support despite the West's effort to isolate him. Only 17 African leaders, including South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, are attending the Russia-Africa summit.
Now, this is the guy right here who's been very vocal about the collapse of Niger. This guy right here is the head of Wagner, Mr. Prigozhin. A lot of you have seen him on the news and have seen him a lot on my channel, and he's been calling the West colonizers. He's been calling them colonizers in Niger, and he's been supportive of the destabilization of Niger, but he's calling it an overtake, a coup, a revolution, and he's speaking on the Telegram of Wagner. That's the only way you can really get access to his videos and to his voice messages. But nonetheless, he's even shown support in saying we are willing to send mercenaries and give you guys our quote-unquote services. And pretty much what that means is the services of Wagner, it's quite simple. We'll go into your country, we'll work with you, possibly for free. Maybe you guys give us some commodities, but you get linked to Russia. That's why we have this summit in St. Petersburg and why these African countries are getting free grain, because they align themselves with Russia. Again, this all looks very enticing for a country that's been destabilized, but nonetheless, you cannot trust Russia and their actions in Africa, because the reason why this guy right here, the new leader of Niger and the general of the army, is because of how unsecure Niger has been. Now, that's within Niger, but what does that have to do with Wagner and Russia? Well, Wagner in Mali has been pushing out a bunch of militants into Niger and causing issues within Niger. And many people speculate, and many people have proof that this was the game plan all along for Mali to restabilize their country, destabilize Niger, and then all of a sudden Wagner will come out and help you. But something else that's really interesting is that this guy right here is not necessarily falling for it. So there is sort of a silver lining in all of this. The general has even said Mali has been disingenuine in actually working with us, because all they've been doing is sending all of their militants into our country, and we're having issues trying to actually take these militants out. We need more support. We need a new leader, and that's why this guy is in charge now. So what exactly is the U.S. military doing in Niger while all of this is going down? Well, we know for certain there's about 1,000 U.S. service members in Niger at the time of making this video. We also know that the embassies are still open. There's been no evacuations, moment, everyone is just on standby. When I say standby, I mean restricted movements. No one knows exactly what's going on. The CIA is reporting, not to travel to Niger and to watch out for Niger. Not in a bad way, but we don't want the same thing that happened in Sudan, where all of a sudden the embassy, everyone evacuated, and now U.S. citizens had nowhere to go. That's the last thing we want to happen in Niger, because unfortunately in Niger, it's going to be a way more tricky situation to get people evacuated out of a country that's already destabilized and already has militant groups like literally walking around Niger like it's the wild, wild west. Now, within Niger, these bases are air bases, like drone bases, and they are essentially midway points for U.S. Special Forces and other troops who might need to operate out of Africa, but they also hold as staging areas for African nations to come into these bases and to also train with U.S. Special Forces. It's essentially a safe haven within Niger, but it also has a U.S. presence right in the middle of Africa in case anything pops off. It's a very, very strategic position, and the U.S. military has invested a lot of time and manpower in these areas of Niger since the beginning of the early 2000s after the September 11th attacks. Now, something else I have to mention is that Niger has a lot of uranium. In fact, reports say that Niger has up to 5% of the world's uranium, which is a massive deal. In fact, 50% of French uranium comes from Niger. So again, Niger, they are a poor country, but they're also a very important country in the world trade of uranium. If your country wants to work with nuclear power, you need uranium and other aspects of military technology. So nonetheless, Niger does hold a massive stake in a very important commodity, so we could only assume this is why Wagner all of a sudden really cares about Niger, because Wagner works for commodities in favor of Russia, and then Russia will pay Wagner, or sometimes the hosting country will pay them directly, and then Russia gets a cut of the commodity. This right here is a very important map because this shows where the influence is of Wagner. This is where Wagner operates out of. You can see the manpower throughout the countries. And the first video we watched, they sort of were like, oh, only 17 countries showed up to the St. Petersburg conference. And now look, I am not supporting Russia in any way, shape, or form. I think they are crooks, and I think what they're doing in Africa is terrible. But it goes to show that Russia has a very, very strong stake within Africa. So they obviously know what they're doing, and they know how to manipulate your country or to go after these third world countries. Because I keep saying this. From the Western perspective, especially the U.S. perspective, we automatically assume that these countries are so dirt poor. I mean, look at those dirt roads. Look at the chickens walking across the roads. All of these houses are mud huts. But remember, the higher powers of these African countries have money. The country of Mali reportedly pays Wagner $200 million in their military contract currently. That's a lot of money. Now, we don't know what these other countries are paying, but you can only probably add up. It's a lot of money. Also, considering if Wagner is able to get into Niger and then get some sort of uranium deal, even if it's only like 0.05% of the uranium will go to Wagner or go to Russia, that's a lot of money, and that's a massive deal for Wagner to try getting into Niger. Now, the last thing I want to say, and this is where the U.S. military and the government is a little worried, is that Russia could potentially try to get themselves involved with further destabilizing Niger, maybe instigating some sort of false flag attack, maybe instigating some sort of civil war, because what we do know is that Russia has been helping out Sudan and giving them arms. Now, what you have to understand is that Sudan and Russia, Wagner, they've all been working together already. So the United States has been sort of questioning, and the world is questioning, why all of a sudden, is this civil war still going on? We thought it was going to be over after 3 days. And if you guys look back at the reports when this civil war was going on, the fighting stopped. All of a sudden, everything was okay, and many people believed after 3 days the fighting would have stopped, but the fighting is still continuing at the time of making this video. And many people say, well, this is because of Russia and this is because of Wagner. They want this to keep going to further destabilize the country and to show support to Sudan. This might be in their deal or agreement where if Sudan goes into a civil war, Russia, you have to help us out. Wagner, you have to help us out. Now, in terms of the United States, this is not a good thing because the United States does not want this to happen. They want peace in Africa. They want peace in the country of Niger. And when you have an outside source who has nothing to do with Niger and then all of a sudden is supplying them with arms, or they're pushing more people from Mali into Niger, this is not good for the U.S. because the U.S. has their hands tied behind their back. Yes, they have these military bases in Niger, but they're not significant enough and they don't have enough ground troops to really make the biggest impact ever. Also, the last thing the United States wants is to have boots on the ground within Africa. That would be a terrible look for the United States in Africa, especially when all of a sudden they're being called colonizers again by Mr. Prigozhin, head of Wagner. So that's the video. Let me know what you guys think of all of this going down. I think it's a terrible situation, and I think the United States is going to have to give up some sort of monetary value or more security assistance within Niger for all of this to cool down. Because again, the number one complaint and why this new general is in charge of Niger is because they have a lack of security. They do not feel secured. And the United States is going to probably have to step up and say, well, look, we'll send in maybe more special forces. We'll give you guys more help. Maybe we'll give you like a tank or two, but nonetheless, the U.S. military, the CIA, the government, they need to figure out how they're going to restabilize this country, because if Niger keeps falling apart, Russia's playbook and what they always do in Africa is they try to go into a country, and this is one less country who's willing to work with the United States, and this is another country who's going to fall into this new Soviet Union era Africa, which is going to be very bad for all of Africa and the rest of the world. Nonetheless, this is what's happening in Africa right now. Let me know what you guys think about all of this. Leave your comments and opinions down below, and we'll see you guys later.